So today we'll be discussing the movies Black Orpheus and Pan's Labyrinth and how myth and rituals plays a part in them and the elements of myth and ritual plays a part in them. So Black Orpheus, to give you some background, is set in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil during Carnival. And the protagonist Orpheus is an amazing musician and Eurydice is a country girl who's trying to escape a man who's trying to kill her. But they're destined to be in love just like the gods are. And the movie is based on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and although he's engaged to Mira, his love is so great that he does not care. Sadly, they have a tragic love story. Eurydice ends up passing away by being electrocuted, and Orpheus cannot believe it, so he goes in search for her at the missing persons department, but she's not there. There's only a janitor. The janitor takes him to this room down below, which can be considered the underworld, and there I met with this group of dancers who are performing a ritual in order for spirits to possess them. So he chants along with them, and Eurydice possesses a body and tells Orpheus, "I can stay, but you can't look back at me." And he looks back, and she ends up disappearing forever. And he goes to retrieve her dead body at the morgue, and he takes it back to the village, and Mira comes after him, and he falls off a cliff and passes away with Eurydice in his arms in a bunch of vegetation. Now, the myth behind this is the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and Orpheus is the best musician and poet in Greek mythology, and he's born from the muse and epic poetry of epic poetry, Calip, and the Thracian king. Now, his golden instrument was given to him by the god Apollo as a child who taught him how to play, and his mother taught him how to write verses. So his music is so great that it just charms anyone, even gods. And it's so great that, in fact, that he can drown out the sound of sirens, who are the ladies who get sailors to crash their boats into the island. He helped the Argonauts by singing over their music. Now, he married Eurydice, who's a wood nymph, and she was killed by being bitten by a viper at her wedding. And Orpheus found the body, and so saddened by it, he started crying, and the gods and the nymphs cried along with him because his music was so beautiful. And they told him to go to the underworld. So he travels to the underworld, he faces Cerberus, which is a three-headed dog, and it lies down because the music is so beautiful. And then he faces Hades and his wife Persephone, and they're so moved by his song. Everyone in hell is moved by his music, but they're so moved that they tell him, "You can go get her, but you can't look back into hell when you leave." But he goes and he leaves, and he doesn't know if she's following him or not, so he looks back, and then she disappears forever, and she's lost to him. Orpheus ends up traveling in the woods and singing, and eventually faces death at the hands of Thracian Maenads, which are female followers of the god Dionysus, because he didn't honor Dionysus, he only honored Apollo. And the fragments of his bodies were carried to the heavens, to Mount Olympus, and buried there by the Muses, and Zeus sent an eagle to retrieve his golden instrument into the sky, and they both became constellations. That's the constellation Lyra. Now, Orpheus, we can assume, is like the vegetation god. We can tell that stuff that he does affects the world. Like, he makes the sun rise by his music, and he dies within vegetation, and he can tell that he's very connected to the music and the earth, and he's just he's a reincarnation of this demigod. And we can assume that they're both reincarnations because they have met before, they faced this trouble before, and they go through the same phases. They fall in love, Eurydice dies, Orpheus looks back, and she's lost forever. The movie also implies that the child at the end might be the new Orpheus, and the little girl could either be the new Eurydice, maybe even the new Mira, and he's playing the music and he's making the sun rise, and it's about this. The sun can be represented in this death and rebirth phase. The sun is like this rebirth, and the nighttime represents death. It's a cycle. And at night, it's dangerous. Eurydice dies that night, and when the morning comes, they're happy and they're festive. Now, the ritual component within this movie is the scene at the end where he goes and he sees this ritual happening with people dancing, getting possessed, and it's ritualistic in nature because samba in Portuguese means to invoke the spirit of the ancestors, and that's what they're doing. They're trying to invoke the spirits of the ancestors or spirits to possess them, to speak with them. And they're doing it while dancing in a circle, and they're chanting. It's very it looks like a ritual. And this is funny because samba was outlawed as a dangerous expression of black slave culture until the 1930s, but here it is being used in this movie and shown. So Carnival, in a sense, is also very religious in nature as well, because it kicks off the 5-day celebration of the Catholic religion of Ash Wednesday and the Lent and the sacrifice we make for Jesus Christ, and it's celebrated by floats and dancing and music, samba music, and the music within the movie brings life to like the movie, and it inspired the bossa nova movement explosion, and it really just plays a big part within the component of this movie. The music that Orpheus sings, the samba that's being played, it all just encaptures the audience. Now, in Pan's Labyrinth, it's definitely more heavily based on myth. The plot is, it was set in the 1944 post-Civil War Spain, and the protagonist Ophelia, who's only a child, and her pregnant mother Carmen travel to her stepfather's, Captain Vidal's, war camp. And Ophelia is bound to this fairy tale destiny, in which she's a lost princess, Moana, who escaped from the underground kingdom in order to see humanity, but the sunlight she faced was so bright it erased her memory. And before, she had never experienced pain before, but coming into the human world, she experiences pain and ends up dying. But her father believed that her spirit would be reincarnated, and that's why he built the labyrinths in order for her to return home. So, meanwhile, a war is happening between Vidal and the Spanish Marquis, or a guerrilla group who oppose the current government, the fascist government. And it very parallels the world that Ophelia is facing at the time. And she has to make sacrifices, and we'll go into that as we talk. Now, let's look at some myths. So Ophelia, the word Ophelia means help or aid. And there's a Shakespearean character named Ophelia who's associated with madness. And even in Hamlet, Ophelia is an innocent who loses touch with reality because of her unbearable reality. She goes crazy. And Ophelia plays a really big role. She's the protagonist within the movie. And she ends up, at the beginning, finding this eye, which leads her to this insect. And this insect turns out to be a fairy. And the fairy leads her to the labyrinth within the maze. And she meets a faun. Not necessarily Pan, because Pan is a god. He's a faun or a satyr, which is goat-like in nature, from Greek religion and myth, who is the god of wild shepherds and flocks, nature of the mountain wilds, rustic music, and companion of myths. But it's not this. It's a different faun. And Ophelia has trouble with him at times. He seems to really care at moments, but also seems to be tricking her in a way and testing her to see if she's worthy. And he's anthropomorphic, which means he's half man, half creature. And he sends her on these tasks. So the first task he sends her is to go kill a toad by feeding him 3 rocks. And it's very ironic because the rocks that he gives her kind of refer to like toadstones, which are found in toads' heads and are an antidote to poison and stuff. And it's ironic because the toad is the thing poisoning the tree that she's trying to save. So the toad eats the rocks and passes away, and she retrieves the key from it, and the tree comes back to life slowly. And Ophelia is becoming this almost god of vegetation. She's leaving her mark on the world. She's leaving her mark on the earth. She's changing things for the better. She's helping this tree get back to life and be reborn and rebirth. And then she's sent to her second task, which is to face the pale man. And she retrieves the key the dagger that she's supposed to retrieve by using the key. But she ends up eating the food that she was told not to eat by the faun. And when she eats it, this pale man, who kind of is a mix of Homer's Cyclops with really also looks like Saturn in the painting, Saturn devouring his son. And his myth is really inspired by the Odysseus' journey in the Cyclops lair. So he wakes up because she ate the food, and he ends up killing 2 fairies that are with her, and she ends up escaping with her life. But the faun is really pissed that she ate the food. And so he gives up on her and he leaves, and Ophelia goes through a lot of stuff with Captain Vidal and the rebels, and she tries to escape and fails, and the faun comes back. He pities her a little bit. and he sends Ophelia on her last task, which is to retrieve her brother. Now, when she retrieves her brother and she takes her brother away, which her brother was born through miscarriage. Her mother passed away through the birth of her brother. She takes it back to the labyrinth, and the fawn goes, we just need a drop of his blood, just an innocent's blood, just give me a drop. And Ophelia denies the fawn. She goes, I will not spill innocent blood in order for this task to be done. And Vidal ends up killing her, and her blood drips into the labyrinth, and her brother's, Vidal's eventually captured and taken by the rebels, and the baby's taken by the rebels, but her blood spills, and it transports her into the kingdom which she is from. Now, there's a lot of parallels between the world she's in and the world Vidal's in. When she goes through stuff, like when she opens the book and the book bleeds, it makes her mother bleed. Things like that. When they put the mandrake root under her bed, her mother starts to feel better. When they burn it, her mother passes away. The parallels between the world are very similar. We can even say that the monsters are parallels to Vidal. Maybe the monsters represent Vidal. Now, what Del Toro is showing us within this movie is that these monsters are supposed to represent things that we don't want to deal with. They're supposed to give us understanding for things that we don't understand. And they're also trying to represent Vidal and the struggle Ophelia faces with him. And that's a little difficult to compare. And the theme of the movie is mostly about choice and obedience. You have to make the choice between making the right decision or making your own decision. When Ophelia faces the fawn, she has to decide whether she spills innocent blood or spills her own, and she makes a decision to do the right thing, spill her own blood instead of innocence. And this whole movie is almost a rite of passage for her. She's maturing and coming back with lessons that she learned, and it's a cycle within a sense. And the whole movie is a ritual within itself. There are requirements. There are things she's supposed to do, not supposed to do. It has to be done by a certain time. It's very interesting to see that. On top of that, we also see that the cinematography as she descends the stairs into the labyrinth is the intermediate transformative moment to her, where she is taking the steps, she's crossing the threshold, she's going on this hero's adventure. She had the call for adventure, she ran after it. She found the fairies, and the cinematography and the placing of the eyes in the statue is just unlocks this world of magic that she is entering. And we see that Ophelia has probably been reincarnated a bunch of times and has failed this task many times, only to finally be victorious in it. So the death and rebirth of her as a vegetation god, as this deity and queen or princess that she is, it really shows within the reincarnation part of it. And it's as if she's as if we're comparing her to the New Year's cycle. She's going through this rebirth and death and rebirth and death. And her completing this task is creating this balance within the nature, like the rebirth of the tree, and she's leaving her mark onto the world. Del Toro does an incredible job with cinematography and how he does the movie with music and the acting, and it's really just incredible how he decides to portray the movie and portray Ophelia, because even she is flawed in nature. And how Vidal is so ruthless compared to her. It's definitely opposites, going against each other. But the myths and rituals within both films are very prominent and very obvious. You can see it. There's a lot of things going on. We definitely see that the fascist represents the disconnect from goodness and love in the name of power, while the rebels represent nobility and resistance and integrity and humanity. And that's what Ophelia wants. So she ends up returning home to her king father and being greeted. And I wish Del Toro didn't spoil it for us a little bit. He does say that fake world that fairy tale world does exist. But I wish he kind of left it as blank, because it would have been nice to be is this something she's just using to cope with the harsh reality she's facing, or is this reality real? But he does spoil it. He does say that the fairy tale is real to her. But, it's a happy ending at a cost. She has to die in order for her to be reborn into this new world. So thank you so much for listening, and have a good day.